Hello and welcome to Jamie Scott Dog Owner Training. This video is on the process that I use to choose a new dog food for Jack. I found this task to be insanely difficult. I mean, bordering on impossible. Let me dive in and walk you through my experience. I started off just gathering information. I started watching YouTube videos that reviewed different foods, compared them. I went to websites on dog food reviews. I went to manufacturers' websites to get information. Very quickly, I realized that more information is not better in this process. All it did was confuse me. There's just too much information. You heard of the paradox of choice? Yeah, there are too many options. Not only was there too much information, but I didn't feel as though I could trust any of the information. Every manufacturer makes these claims that are just, there's no way to know if I can believe them or not. Similarly, the review websites, I have no idea who's sponsoring those websites or whether I can trust the information on there. So I decided to change my approach. That process of gathering information was not a waste of time. It allowed me to come up with the questions that I needed to ask myself about what's important to me. Now I've decided, okay, I got to figure out what it is, what criteria I want to apply. What's important to me in choosing a food? And I came up with 3. Initially, I had 4. I'll talk about that. First one is nutrition. Very important to me. I want very high quality food that has good nutrition for my dog. That rules out lots of different foods. So most kibble is cooked at high temperature and extruded. There is some evidence to suggest that those processes degrade the protein in the food and affect the nutritional value. That rules out a lot of different foods, almost all kibble. That means I'm looking at freeze-dried, raw, those types of foods. The next criteria that I applied was I wanted the producer of the food to make the sourcing of the protein a very high priority and minimize suffering of the animals used and take a fairly sustainable approach to livestock production. That was really important to me. I considered plant-based or vegan foods, but I rejected those because I've also been on a vegan diet before, but I really like the taste of meat, so I've decided that I just don't eat emotionally intelligent animals like cows and pigs, but I do sometimes eat poultry and fish. And I wanted the same for my dog. The third criteria that I decided on was I don't want the food to take up room in my refrigerator or freezer. That rules out a lot of foods. Almost all of these, farm fresh, nom nom, all these foods that are human grade, that are just basically raw, mixed up ingredients, they have to be refrigerated or frozen. I had a fourth criteria of cost on my list. I figured out really quickly that all of these top-notch foods that I'm looking at are basically $2 to $3 per serving. So cost was just a wash, and I removed it from the list. So I have these 3 criteria. Number 1, the nutrition needs to be high, so no high-temperature cooked or extruded foods. Number 2, producer of the food needs to make minimizing animal cruelty and suffering a high priority. So they need to be very selective about how they source their meat. And number 3, it shouldn't take up room in my fridge or freezer. With that, I started looking at manufacturers. I looked at lots of them, and only one met my criteria. Specifically, the criteria about minimizing the suffering of animals. And that was Open Farm. They're the only manufacturer I found that made that a high priority. In their mission and everything about the company, it's a very high priority to source their protein in ways that are somewhat sustainable and minimize the suffering of animals. There are lots of manufacturers out there that claim cage-free, range-free poultry, human-grade foods, but none of these terms really mean anything. These guys pasture-raised chickens that roam freely and eat bugs. And there's a little QR code on the back of each bag. You can actually go to the farm where they source the protein and see how they do business. I really like that about Open Farm. So then I had to choose between 2 recipes. They have a freeze-dried version, and then they have this thing called raw mix. which is actually kibble that is cooked at high temperature, but then it's coated with a powder, a raw powder, and has chunks of dehydrated meat in the kibble. Those were my choices. And at that point, it came down to flavors. I like the idea of having at least 2 flavors. I don't want to feed Jack the exact same food every day of his life, okay? I get tired of eating the same thing every day, and so I like a little bit of variety. And so I wanted some selection, and the freeze-dried only had, when I'm looking at non-beef, non-pork recipes, most companies have a poultry version and a fish version in addition. Well, Open Farm doesn't. In their freeze-dried recipes, it's pork, beef, or lamb. Then they got turkey or poultry. They have one that's fish, surf and turf, so it's cows and fish. So basically, the only 2 options for me in Open Farm's freeze-dried recipes were turkey and chicken. And the raw mix, which was the kibble one that I decided on, that has the coating of raw and also the chunks of meat, they had a poultry version and a fish version. So that's the one I went with, even though the kibble is produced at higher temperature. They didn't truthfully satisfy all of my criteria, but they by far are the closest of any manufacturer I found. So that's why I went with Open Farm. I'm in the process of transitioning Jack to that food right now. I may revisit the whole dehydrated, freeze-dried thing later. I was pretty happy feeding Jack and Bruno both Dr. Marty's. One of my motivations for changing foods was I thought it was ridiculously expensive, and it came in very small packages, so I had to reorder frequently. The truth of the matter is it wasn't any more expensive than any other top-notch food I was looking at. It was basically in the same range. And on a subscription plan, it really doesn't matter. The reordering is kind of a non-issue. I ended up switching to a producer that had more sustainable, more conscious approach to sourcing their protein. That's what I got for you today. I'm on X now, link below. Thanks for watching, and take care.